Federal data reveals $100 million tied China to U.S. universities and colleges. Senator Marco Rubio says it's Beijing's plan to overtake the United States.
More than 24 U.S. universities were found to have financial ties with China. That's according to a new report. The report says China-based entities, including the Chinese regime, secured contracts worth $120 million with American colleges in 2021. The true extent of the issue is likely far broader. Senator Marco Rubio criticized the agreement, calling it part of the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to supplant the United States as the world's superpower. Rubio wrote in an email, "The Chinese Communist Party is exploiting our education and research institutes to steal our secrets and gain influence," adding that this is all part of Beijing's plan to overtake the United States as the world's most powerful nation. The Chinese entities tied to the U.S. universities were frequently left unnamed in the university's reporting of foreign gifts. The largest financial tie detected was between the University of Houston and an unnamed private Chinese entity. Their agreement involved over $30 million, while the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign made 4 agreements. Their combined value exceeds $26 million. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology, also known as MIT, also had multiple agreements worth more than $14 million. None of the universities responded to requests for comment by airtime. The most well-known component of the China-funded program is the Confucius Institute. The Chinese Communist regime says the institute aims to teach Chinese language and culture worldwide. But many are concerned that the institute spread the Communist Party's propaganda and restricted academic freedom. Out of the over 120 Confucius Institutes in the U.S., only more than a dozen of them are still open.
According to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, the Chinese Communist Party continues to commit genocide and crimes against humanity against the Uyghur ethnic group. Those remarks coincide with the release of an annual report about human rights in various countries. Kevin Hogan from NTD News Today has more.
The Chinese government continues to commit genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang against predominantly Muslim Uyghurs, among other minority groups.
Blinken made this statement as part of a briefing marking the release of the newest edition of an annual report. It's called the Country Reports on Human Rights Practices. The State Department publishes it to cover human rights issues. It includes details on 198 countries across the world. Blinken asserts that there is a recession of democracy happening in the world, and he said what the Chinese regime is doing is a key example of growing authoritarianism. That is what Blinken calls its mass campaign of repression and genocide against the Uyghurs. The report also described the CCP as an authoritarian state, and it said religious and ethnic minorities are still being persecuted in mainland China and other territories that the regime occupies. And speaking of China, a new report outlines attempts to undercut U.S. space efforts. The Defense Intelligence Agency published the report. It describes how China and Russia would try to counter the advantage the U.S. has in space. A defense intelligence officer explains why.
Russia and China, our primary strategic competitors, are taking steps to undercut the United States and our allies in the space domain. Both nations view space as a requirement for winning modern wars, especially against Western nations, and look to prove themselves as world leaders.
A defense intelligence analyst also points to the two countries' combined assets in space. He said they've grown about 70% in only 2 years. He outlines their ambitions.
Both nations seek to broaden their space exploration initiatives, together and individually, with plans to explore the Moon and Mars during the next 30 years. And if successful, these efforts will likely lead to attempts by Beijing and Moscow to exploit the Moon's natural resources.
What's more, he said that Moscow is now developing a missile that is able to destroy satellites and space vehicles.
Today, Shanghai reported its first COVID death since the lockdown began. The city has been locked down for more than half a month now, with over 300,000 reported cases. But strangely, no deaths attributed to the virus until now. NTD's Don Ma has the story.
Health officials say 3 people died from COVID on Sunday. They were between 89 and 91 years old. A number of outlets have pointed out how low the death count has been in Shanghai. For comparison, Hong Kong has reported thousands of deaths amid its recent virus outbreak. Shanghai has been battling a surge in Omicron cases. The city's lockdown is the most severe since the one in Wuhan. Locals are not allowed to leave their homes, even to buy groceries. Immunology and global health specialist Dr. Alejandro Diaz tells me lockdowns are not the right way to tackle Omicron.
Lockdowns, they don't work as well as we thought. They don't work as well. But what I can tell you is that herd immunity and vaccination rate for those who believe in the vaccine is key.
Diaz explains because that is what Omicron is comparable to.
Omicron, it's really like very similar to a common cold. You just stay at home for 2 or 3 days and then you go to work, you go to school, you go outside.
City authorities are also sending infected residents to government-run quarantine facilities. If you're wondering what the living conditions are like at some of these facilities, they're not good. Construction hasn't even finished at some of them. People are sleeping on the ground, there are water leaks in the ceilings, and the facilities are packed with people. One Shanghai resident said that he actually got virus symptoms after being sent there. And keep in mind that the people at these places are mostly those who have the virus. As the Shanghai lockdown continues, Chinese netizens have started echoing the first line of the Chinese national anthem, which says, "Stand up, those who refuse to be slaves." But now it seems Chinese censors are banning the first line of its national anthem online. Hashtags of the phrase are no longer searchable on Chinese social media platform Weibo. China wants to be a powerful country on the world stage, but economists have said that it can't achieve that goal if it keeps its economy locked down.
In an effort to strengthen self-reliance, the Chinese Communist Party's new economic policy is calling for a unified domestic market. The document mapped out the creation of the mega project on Sunday. Let's take a look at what it actually is and if it could signal whether Beijing is preparing for war.
In a bid to make Chinese economy less dependent on the outside world, Beijing unveiled a new plan. That is, building a so-called unified domestic market for the country.
This is a landmark action by the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, the CCP not only proposed political challenges to the ideology and social system of the West, now economically it's putting together its own so-called CCP plan.
According to guidelines released Sunday by the Chinese Communist Party, the Unified Domestic Market Plan aims to promote more regulations, from China's domestic production to resource use. That would cover a number of areas, like energy, data, and technology. The new strategy also looks to break down local protectionism and eliminate other obstacles that prevent domestic markets from working efficiently. In China, local protectionism refers to regional blockades and restrictions on the flow of goods. They're usually part of efforts by city or province-level officials to protect locally based industries. But China affairs analyst Tang says that's only on the surface level.
It actually aims to create a unified market to ensure the CCP is in charge of everything. So the CCP is able to participate in the entire process of any commodity, from its production to its circulation, to its access to the market, and to its final consumption.
According to Tang, there's another, more realistic purpose at present. The CCP wants to resolve China's current economic dilemma. Recently, a series of strict lockdowns in large Chinese cities have started piling pressure onto the domestic production sector. On top of that, Russia's invasion of Ukraine is adding to China's supply chain disruptions, as well as shortages of critical resources like food and energy. For Beijing, the global economic sanctions against Moscow, levied over its invasion, may serve as a cautionary tale. In an interview on Monday, a Communist Party official told China's state-run media agency that speeding up building a national unified market is a realistic need of achieving scientific and technological self-reliance.
The CCP may be preparing for the future. For example, Taiwan. If it invades Taiwan, it will likely face similar or even tougher sanctions than Russia today. Then it must minimize the negative impact of these sanctions. That's why it must build a self-sufficient and self-reliant internal economic circulation model.
But as the world's second largest economy pivots inward, how will China's shift impact the rest of the globe?
This will definitely deepen the gap between the two primary models, the market economy and the planned economy. In other words, this will add to the duality of the world, not just on a political level, but also in the economic sphere.
Tang adds that Beijing's unified domestic market strategy is nothing new. It essentially follows the same structure as a centrally planned economy. The Chinese Communist regime introduced that model in the past to fight Western capitalism. And as the unified domestic market comes into place, China may return to its old habits.
Another comment from China's Premier Li Keqiang during the same meeting also garnered public attention. Some Chinese language media outlets even used it in an eye-catching headline, reading, "Li Keqiang encourages everyone to speak the truth." Li makes the remark during talks with entrepreneur representatives. A media outlet questioned why Li made the statement, noting that in China, telling the truth often requires courage and may involve risking loss of employment or even jail time.
China's zero COVID policy is the reason why Shanghai is currently under strict lockdown, which has severely impacted the Chinese economy. Factories and businesses are closed, consumers are confined at home, ports and the supply chain are disrupted. The head of China's National Health Commission released a statement Monday. He says China will firmly oppose what it calls the wrongful thinking of coexisting with the virus. NTD's Don Ma helps us get to the bottom of why China is sticking with a policy that is so damaging to its economy.
The head of China's National Health Commission said, quote, "Consolidate the hard-won pandemic prevention results and take practical action to welcome the 20th Party Congress." The interesting thing about this statement was that he associated the zero COVID policy with an important upcoming CCP meeting. The 20th Party Congress is the meeting at which Xi Jinping will seek a third term. So why is the zero COVID policy associated with this meeting? Could this policy be motivated by politics rather than the well-being of the Chinese people? I talked with an experienced China expert for some answers. He says whether the zero COVID policy is successful directly impacts whether Xi Jinping will get a third term.
He regards successful pandemic prevention through the zero COVID strategy as one of the three major political achievements. He won't allow another strategy to take the zero COVID strategy's place. If that happened, it will be equivalent to Xi Jinping announcing that he has made a serious mistake in pandemic prevention. This would become a major obstacle for him to getting a third term.
The lockdowns as a result of the zero COVID policy have impacted China's economy. Factories are shut down, retail sales declined in March compared to last year. People are confined to their homes, they can't buy groceries, they're starving. Some have even taken their own lives because the lockdown is too much for them to bear. Why is Xi Jinping sticking to the zero COVID policy when it's hurting the Chinese economy and the Chinese people? Tang says Xi will disregard any cost as long as he can maintain power.
CCP officials have always had this kind of thinking. The CCP will try to achieve its political goals or maintain its power at any cost. Because if it loses its power, it could never get it back. If the economy is ruined, they can always try to slowly recover it in the future. Even if people's lives and health are impacted, it's not important.
Tang thinks China will stick to the zero COVID policy until the CCP's 20th Party Congress is over, which is in November this year. Don Ma, NTD News.